He was absolutely convinced that he understood how the world was arranged. He was a man of formulas, calculations, and precision. He did not believe in God. He considered the soul to be a fiction and spirituality nothing more than a naive illusion. His name was Viktor Veynik, a Soviet scientist, doctor of technical sciences, and thermophysicist. He could predict the behavior of particles and describe any process with an equation, but one single encounter changed everything. He literally saw something for which there was no formula in his world. He had always regarded his own theory of subtle worlds as nothing more than a bold, resonant, yet still scientific hypothesis. Yet that theory was literally burned, not figuratively but in the most real sense. Hundreds of copies of his books, decades of work, all of it was thrown into the fire on the direct orders of the authorities. His major work on thermodynamics was removed from libraries and bookstores and destroyed. A colleague, watching this grim scene, joked darkly, "Thank God they're burning books and not authors." Veynik replied with the words of Giordano Bruno, "Burning does not mean refuting." But that was only the beginning. During one seminar at the Ivanovo Medical Institute, Veynik declared, "I have been told that lovers of everything mysterious have gathered here. I hope I will not disappoint you, but I have no intention of abandoning materialistic science." His speech was calm, almost dry, yet what he said next hypnotized the entire audience. He claimed that the entire universe is a system of levels. We live in the macro world, the ordinary world of space and time. Within it operates the physics we learn at school. Deeper still is the micro world, electrons, atoms, molecules, and even deeper begin the subtle layers of reality, the pico world, the femto world, the atto world. It is there that processes occur that cannot be explained by the laws of physics, and it was precisely there, as it later turned out, that something was hidden that would change everything. He explained that these worlds exist simultaneously and interpenetrate one another like matryoshka dolls, except they are not nested inside each other, but dissolved within each other. It is difficult to imagine and even harder to accept, because according to his words, these objects exist outside of time and outside of space. They are literally smeared throughout our entire world. You cannot touch them, yet it is they who determine what we call consciousness. Our consciousness, Veynik explained, does not obey the laws of time and space. It operates according to entirely different principles, the principles that govern the subtle worlds. That is why a human being is capable of things that science cannot explain: reading thoughts, sensing danger, influencing objects at a distance, diagnosing illnesses, foreseeing events. None of this is fantasy. It is simply the natural consequence of consciousness being connected to more subtle levels of existence. The hall listened in complete silence. It seemed even the air had become thicker. A scientist who denied God suddenly began speaking about things that priests and mystics usually talk about, yet he did so with strict logic, without the slightest hint of esotericism. Only facts, only theory supported by observation. And what was most frightening of all, it all sounded completely believable. He gave example after example. He spoke of poltergeists as manifestations of objects from the subtle world. He explained why they appear near houses where someone tries to contact the afterlife. He talked about UFOs and the special chronal fields that remain after their appearances. People, according to him, became ill and even died if they stayed too long in those places. He insisted that none of this was myth or fantasy. Humanity was simply not yet ready to admit that beyond the boundary of the ordinary world something else exists. At that time he still did not believe in a creator. He held firmly to his own view. Subtle worlds, yes, God, no. But that was only a stage. 15 years later, he would collide with something that would bring him to his knees. He was not looking for faith and was not waiting for a miracle. But one day, when his own body failed and he had to be hospitalized, a man appeared beside him who changed everything. It was an old priest, thin, tired, yet with a warm gaze. He was dying of lung cancer. He was fading before their eyes, yet somehow radiated an extraordinary calm, as if he already knew the answers to the questions Veynik had been struggling with his entire life. They lay in the same ward. At first, the scientist listened to the priest's stories about God, about light and darkness, about the battle between good and evil forces for human souls, with skepticism. It all seemed familiar. He had heard it before and had always rejected it. But there was something in those words that resonated deep inside him, something painfully familiar. It was as if he had already seen these images, only not in the Bible, but in his own formulas and graphs. Suddenly he realized, as he later recalled, that everything this man was saying he had already described, only in different words. Those were his own objects of the subtle worlds. He had measured them himself, recorded their charge, positive or negative, and that was exactly what the Holy Scripture spoke about. He did not know how to react. His mind resisted, logic screamed about coincidence, but his heart began to surrender. He started reading the Bible again, and with every page it became more and more terrifying because the parallels were too precise. The words of the ancient book suddenly overlaid his own calculations. Then the old priest quietly told him, "Repent, accept baptism, perhaps the illness will recede." At that very moment the doctors finished their examination and said there were serious reasons for concern. And Veynik, a man of formulas and equations, went to church for the first time in his life. He did not know what to do. His head was spinning. The moment he crossed the threshold, he felt dizzy, lost consciousness, fell, and hit the back of his head. The blow was strong. An ambulance was called. From that day on, he no longer went to the temple alone, and strangely, the illness began to recede. The weakness disappeared. The feeling of life returned. He felt alive again. "It is hard to believe," he said later, "but I began to recover." That same year, he accepted baptism. He was already 73 years old. About the priest with whom he had shared the ward, Veynik would later say, "That old man opened my eyes. Thanks to him, I understood that truth can come not from a laboratory, but through simple words, through kindness, through inner light." He began to read the holy books again, not as a critic, but as a man who was searching. With each day, he became more and more convinced. His theory did not contradict religion. It simply complemented it and explained the same things in different words. He even started to wonder, what if everything I knew was not given to me by chance? What if it was passed down from above? Then why did the entire official science turn against me? He asked himself, why were they so afraid of what he had discovered? Why did they destroy his work? He remembered his experiments and measurements. He knew that subtle worlds really exist in nature, pico-worlds, femto-worlds. You cannot see them with the eye, yet they leave traces. Their objects influence reality, and in the texts of the Bible, they are also described and only called by different names: souls, spirits. And as it turned out, there are two kinds of spirits. Some are bright, others are dark. He was stunned when he realized this. Around us there really is something invisible but very real. Decades of observation and experiments only confirmed it. Objects with a positive charge are good. They leave a bright field. Objects with a negative charge are evil. They bring destruction, illness, and fear. And then everything became clear. Icons, consecrated objects, even the temples themselves are positive. Poltergeists and UFOs are the opposite, negative, minus. Sometimes a person can not only feel this influence, but also make contact with them. And here came the most important conclusion Veynik reached. Saints communicate with good spirits, while clairvoyants communicate with dark ones. He did not rush to conclusions, but more and more often he caught himself thinking that reality is far more complex than it seems, and perhaps everything he had once rejected was actually much closer than he had thought. He still tried to explain everything with logic, but the deeper he went, the clearer it became that ordinary logic no longer applied here. Around us, he said, there are forces we do not see but can feel, and they live their own lives, matters that cannot be squeezed into any equation. A person may not even suspect that at this very moment he is interacting with something from beyond. Sometimes this happens through dreams, sometimes through an inexplicable feeling of fear, or, on the contrary, of peace when it seems everything should be bad. But there can also be direct contact, not through guesses, not through images, but like a conversation, only without words. Saints, Veynik said, enter into contact with good spirits, while clairvoyants do so with dark ones. And that sounded terrifying. He no longer laughed at those who believed in the afterlife, because he now knew it exists. It simply looks different from what we imagine. He believed that beyond this life there is neither old age nor decay, that death is not the end. And he had grounds for that belief. But he was not the only one who thought so. There were others, those who not only studied but had actually crossed to the other side. The name Arthur Ford was known to many. Some considered him a charlatan, others a genius. Even the skeptics admitted he spoke of things that could not be invented. His accounts were too detailed, too vivid, as if he had really been there. And here begins another story, not scientific, but deeply personal. The story of a man who once died and returned to tell about it. Arthur Ford was no longer afraid of death, at least not afterward. Before that, there had been plenty of fear. He was seriously and frequently ill. His heart kept failing. His body kept letting him down. He knew that one day it would happen. He even knew that his heart would be the final boundary. And then the moment came. His relatives had already said goodbye. The doctors said, "No chance." He lay on the hospital bed, pale and weak, when suddenly it began. He saw himself leaving his body. Without fear, without pain. He simply stepped out and found himself floating above the bed. He looked down and saw his own body, but felt neither fatigue nor weight. For the first time in many years, lightness, silence, and complete absence of fear. Then came emptiness, not frightening, but soft. No time, no day or night, no up or down. He simply was, and that was enough. He no longer felt his body, yet he knew he still existed. And suddenly, movement began. From all sides, people started coming toward him. Their faces were familiar, very familiar, but not because he had seen them recently. On the contrary, he had not remembered them for years. Some were from childhood, some from youth, some from a life he had almost forgotten. All of them were dead, yet now they stood before him smiling, speaking without words. He recognized them not by their faces, but by feeling, by inner light. Those who had died in old age now looked young. Those who had passed away in childhood had become adults. Everyone was in their best form, as if each had chosen how they wanted to appear. No one aged there beyond the boundary. Time had no meaning. That shocked him most of all. He understood that in this world a person continues to live, only in a different body. He called it the beta body. It was not a shell of cells, not physics. It was something that does not die. An invisible structure in which consciousness lives. He was pulled back against his will. When he woke up again in his physical body, everything had already changed. He knew he had seen the truth. Death is not the end but a transition, and their loved ones greet us, those we thought we had lost forever. He no longer doubted. Everything that had once seemed conjecture now had clear shape. Life after death exists. He had not only come to believe it, he had seen it. He had passed through it and returned to tell about it. Arthur Ford said that in that world there is no pain and no heaviness. And what was most astonishing, there is no time. It disappears like an unnecessary shell. He felt himself floating through emptiness, yet he did not get lost. He did not disappear. He seemed to be returning to something very close. Nothing pulled him down, no one judged him, but everything that happened forced him to reflect on who he really was. He no longer felt his body, yet he was still himself. And suddenly real majestic mountains rose before him. He stood against their background as people came toward him from all sides. They smiled and embraced him. Some of them had been dead for decades. He had not remembered their faces, yet now he remembered everything and every word, every gesture. The connections between them and himself became obvious. It was as if someone had removed a veil. He said, "I recognized them by feeling because their appearance had changed." The elderly had become young, children had become adults, but inside they were the same. Their souls had not aged. On the contrary, they had opened up. They welcomed him not as a guest, but as one of their own, and he understood, this is home. But he was not allowed to stay. They sent him back, and from that moment he began to speak. At first cautiously, then more and more openly. He did not want to be a prophet, but he could not remain silent because he knew people must know the truth. He said that after death, the body disappears, but something greater remains, the beta structure. It is what preserves personality. It is where consciousness lives. What we see here is only a temporary shell. The closer one comes to the moment of death, the more clearly one feels this. After his return, he felt different. Externally, he was the same, but inside it was as if a second pair of eyes had been opened. Death no longer frightened him. He knew it was not an enemy, not an abyss, but a bridge, a passage, simple doors to another state. After that experience, he no longer said, I think. He said, I know, because he had been through it, because he had seen what is hidden from the eyes. He understood why people fear old age. They fear not wrinkles but loneliness, not the weakness of the body but the loss of meaning. Yet meaning does not disappear. It waits there, beyond the boundary. He recalled how in that world he was allowed to choose his age. He chose 45, the time of his prime, and remained in that form. Everyone he saw was in their best state. Even those who had died in agony on earth now looked as they had in the days of their strength. It was as if the pain had stayed on this side, and on the other side only light remained. He referred to other researchers, such as Edward Riddle, who had also crossed over, and said that in the world of spirits there is no aging. No one who had passed there looked old. Everyone was in their prime. There are no cells there, no time, therefore no wear, no decay. And according to Ford, this is not fantasy, but a fact that science and medicine simply have not yet understood. He described seeing people who had lived even before the flood. He spoke with souls who, by earthly measures, were hundreds and thousands of years old, yet they looked like people in middle age, calm, strong, beautiful. All who enter heaven return to youth and remain in it forever. Even those who died in old age became young, because the soul does not age. It simply takes off its heavy clothing. It was then that he understood. The true face of a person is not in the body, but in what is behind it, in how it shines, in what is felt without words. And when someone says, that's not the person I knew, perhaps they simply failed to recognize the soul. He said that in the world of spirits our loved ones greet us, not images, not shadows, but real, and we recognize them not by their faces, but by their essence, because their appearance reflects not years, but the soul itself. Her grandmother, once wrinkled and hardly able to walk, now greets her grandson as a young and glowing figure, for the soul remains forever in its peak form. He declared, death is not the end, it is simply a homecoming. In that place where time holds no power, the soul casts off all that is unneeded. Fear, pain, loneliness, all that once burdened it vanishes as though it never was, leaving only the essence of who you truly are. Arthur Ford often repeated that the soul is not merely a part of a person, it is the person himself, the real one, the one you cannot see in the mirror, the one who has lived through all bodies, all roles, all masks. It is the soul that knows who you are and where your home is. During one of his last sessions, he said he had seen a huge hall. There his entire life was shown from beginning to end, not with reproach, but as a reminder of every word, every glance. What influence had his actions had? Who had suffered? Who had laughed? He understood that nothing is forgotten, everything matters. And it was not punishment. It was realization, pure, deep, penetrating. Then he was taken to a quiet, peaceful lake. He could have stayed there forever, in a world where no one ages, where the body is not a cellular shell but a luminous structure, where there is no illness, where every movement is like breathing and every word is like thought. He chose the age of 45 because that was when he had felt most alive, and no one forced him. He decided himself. Beyond the boundary, everyone has freedom, not physical, but deeper, the freedom to be oneself. He said, we are used to thinking that we perceive everything through eyes, ears, and touch, but in reality, we feel with the soul. We have simply forgotten how to hear without sound and see without light. In the afterlife, all of that returns, as if organs that were closed in the body are opened. He claimed, all our abilities, intuition, premonitions, are not fantasies. They are signals from that part of us that remembers who we are. And when we feel that someone is near, when we feel support from nowhere, it is not coincidence. We are being guided, we are being waited for, we are being reminded that we are not alone. That was what he tried to convey until the end of his life. Do not fear death, because death is a meeting with yourself, with your loved ones, with the truth that the soul has always known, but the body has forgotten. He passed away in January 1971 at the age of 73. But those who spoke with him afterward said, he did not disappear. He continued to speak through others, through those who were sensitive enough to hear. In one such contact, someone asked Arthur Ford, what awaits us after death? He did not give a universal answer. He said, it all depends on who you are and what kind of soul you have. What you brought with you is what you will find. But if you ask me, here is my answer. There is peace, light, and truth. And most importantly, there is love. A love that needs no words, needs no proofs, and never leaves. He believed that one day each of us will remember. We will remember who we were. We will remember why we came. And we will see familiar faces in a new light, because no one ever leaves forever. We simply return home.